They keep on scratching my back, but then steal my clothes. You then keep on booking my act, then cancel the shows. You then keep pointing out facts, rub my nose in them. I guess karma is a boomerang. This boomerang's back upside my head. I guess this must be for angels. Revenge. Hey.
Maybe today. Stay open and be available. Maybe you'll find something.
They're taking pages out of my book and making me chew. They let me think I'm in the black. They leave me blue.
Oh, I didn't mean to startle you.
No, not at all. I was just setting things up.
This is the...
Bereavement group.
Bereavement.
Yes, this is the bereavement group. Take a seat. You're the first to arrive. Have some coffee. I think it's just been made. Oh, you brought your
Wife.
Well, I'm Tom Larkin.
I'm George Greenleaf. This is my wife, Helen.
Why don't you take a seat?
How many people are you expecting tonight?
I don't know. I mean, we allow 12 to sign up, but we never actually know how many will come.
Yeah, it's been our experience.
Oh, so you've done this sort of thing before?
Yeah, we've been to 5. 5? That's about right.
5?
Yeah. Yeah, 5. We just never could seem to find the right group. But it's important who the other group members are.
We just couldn't find people who were sympathetic. You know what I mean.
It's been really difficult for us since our son died.
Yes, I understand. I can imagine it hasn't been easy.
It's not, but we must keep trying.
Well, I do hope this group meets your expectations. I don't know who the other participants are. I do have a list. But of course, I don't know them. We ran a little ad in the monthly newsletter. Well, of course, you must have seen it, or else you wouldn't be here. Well, I don't know where the others are, but they should be arriving any minute. Have some coffee, and there's some donuts there. The chocolate ones are very good.
Here comes trouble.
This is it? This?
Perhaps you're in the wrong room?
Cute, but not too bright.
What were you looking for?
Hookers Anonymous?
The bereavement group, actually.
This is the bereavement group. We'll take any seat you like. Oh, and there's coffee. I guess I should take attendance. You are...
Jillian Copley.
I'm Tom Larkin. I'm the group leader. I guess we can start. I expected more people, but I guess they've been delayed.
Maybe they came to their senses.
I'm Tom Larkin. I'm a certified social worker, and I've been chosen to facilitate this bereavement group.
Do you know how to do this?
I have run groups before. What we'll do first is say a little something about ourselves. Most groups do that. Besides being a social worker specializing in group therapy, I myself suffered a death in the past year. My brother died very suddenly of lung cancer.
Oh, my.
He was 47 years old. I attended a bereavement group during the last 5 months, and I was asked to lead this one, so I'm here as a leader and a participant.
Who exactly asked you to lead this group?
George!
Oh, I want to know. Look, we've been to 5 groups, remember? I'm tired of listening to these half-assed...
I'm sure that he's qualified.
I'd be happy to show you my resume.
Would you please just introduce yourself?
I'm George Greenleaf. This is my wife, Helen.
George, I'd like each person to introduce themselves as an individual.
Of course. Well, I'm George Greenleaf, and I lost my son Tim a year ago. And I've been to several groups, but They just didn't seem to help us, to help me. So I'm trying to get some help here.
Helen?
I am Helen Greenleaf, and I'm trying to make some sense out of the death of my son. He was only 39 years old. He had a heart attack.
Jillian?
Jillian Copley. I'm here because my dog was killed. My shrink thought I could benefit from some kind of group therapy. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I have some nerve to be here over a dead dog. Well, I'm sorry that I don't have a better death to be here about.
If I may say...
Well, now that we all know why we're here, we can get down to business. There are several things we're going to discuss. Shock, abandonment, grief, our feelings now.
I'm not sure
Let's each give a little information. A story of the circumstances of the deaths that brought us here. Everyone experiences the death of someone in their lives. Many people grieve and go on. But obviously we need something more.
You mean we're losers?
What do you mean by losers?
You know what I mean. He just said most people get over it without going to a group. So there must be something wrong with us since we're going to a group. I already know there's something wrong with me.
She could start by acting a little more ladylike.
We are not losers. I would just say we're a little more sensitive than other people.
Are you saying we're some kind of wusses?
What's this? I love it.
Whatever word you want to use, the idea is that some of us are more affected by death than others.
And another thing, people use the word closure, that they need it. I'm not sure what it means.
The conclusion. The conclusion of something.
I think the sense we mean here is some kind of acceptance of what has happened so we can get on with our lives.
What if you can't accept what's happened?
I think we've got some kind of loser group here.
That's precisely why we have bereavement groups, for people who can't accept someone's death. For some people, it takes more time.
The dead don't come back.
I know the dead don't come back. That's not the problem.
What's the problem?
The problem is the death changes everything. I mean, nothing is ever going to be the same as it was before.
That's obvious. That's why we're here.
We have to rethink the future. It's the future that's changed.
Exactly. Let's start by discussing how we feel right now.
I'm angry.
Good. Why are you angry?
My dog is dead. My life companion, dead. He's probably the only life companion I will ever have. Unless I get another dog, that is.
Was it hit by a car?
No, it wasn't hit by a car.
Then how...
It was poisoned.
Poisoned?
We were out walking, me and the dog. I stopped at the grocery store. I left him with the leash tied to a parking meter. Anyway, you know how people do it. By the time I come out, some kid, some teenager, was feeding the dog something. I yelled and he ran. I tried to get the stuff out of Sparky's mouth, but he had already swallowed some of it.
Did you contact the police?
Did I contact the police? Do you have any idea how complicated it was? You think an animal dies and you just put it in a box and bury it? I put him in a cab and took him to an animal hospital. Of course, it was too late. He died on the way. I asked for an autopsy. I'm still paying it off. No insurance for dogs. I don't have any either, but...
How long has it been?
Since the dog died, 6 months.
Have you thought about getting another dog?
So it can die and leave me feeling lonely. I don't want to go through this again.
What kind of dog was it?
A mutt, half German Shepherd, half whatever.
Now look, I know dog's supposed to be man's best friend, but
Woman's.
are we going to spend the entire evening talking about dogs?
We're just discussing the death that brought Jillian to this group.
I hate to interrupt, Tom, but I really don't think that Miss Copley understands how these groups work.
What do you mean I don't understand how these groups work?
What I mean is, you don't monopolize attention right away. You wait your turn.
George, I'd like to remind you I'm in charge here.
Wait a minute. How do you know so much about groups, George?
As I believe we said before, George and I have been to several bereavement groups.
Several.
5 to be exact. So you see...
So I see you think you're the expert on bereavement groups.
I believe I'm the expert here.
We understand that, Tom. But I believe that experience as a participant counts for something.
And what makes you think I don't have any experience with groups? You're not the only neurotic people in here.
I am not neurotic. Have you been to any other bereavement groups?
No, this is the first.
There, you see?
You see?
That's not the only kind of group there is it?
And what kind of group did you go to?
It's not your business right now.
George, Jillian, Helen, let's not waste time bickering. Since Jillian was the first to speak up, she goes first. And George, just because there's a dog involved doesn't mean this evening is centered around a dog. Now, where was I? Oh, Jillian, another dog may live for years. I don't think you should give up on a companionship just because there may be a loss.
But I never wanted a dog. My father thought it wasn't safe to live alone in the city. So he went out to the animal shelter and got me this dog. He didn't even ask me. He just showed up one day at my apartment. He said he was doing two good deeds, saving a dog's life and giving me protection.
Did you agree with him?
I'm a girl. What I thought never really mattered to him anyway. But I got very attached to the dog.
Did you feel protected?
No, I felt protected, all right. Every morning and every evening when I had to walk the dog, never being able to go away, having to make sure I was home by a certain time, and every week when I had to carry a bag of dog food to my third-floor walk-up. Oh, I felt protected.
So the dog took up a great deal of your time.
Do you have any idea how hard it is to have a sex life when you're always running home to walk a dog? And he never liked it when I had anybody over the apartment. He used to follow everyone around. He made everyone very uncomfortable.
Well, maybe that's why your father got you one.
No, you think?
Young lady, I did not come here to discuss your sex life. I lost my son. And I don't think you should be giving her special preference just because she's
Just because she's an attractive young woman?
Thanks for the compliment, Tom. You're kind of cute yourself.
This is totally unprofessional. This is not supposed to be a singles group.
I'm not giving Jillian preference. It's just that when I said how we feel now, Jillian was the first to speak up. You'll have your turn.
Well, now I'm speaking up. I have been devastated by the death of my son. And I'm a man of reasonable intelligence. I'm an accountant, and I did not come to a bereavement group to talk about sex and dogs.
We were not talking about dogs and sex. We were talking about death and loss and feeling abandoned.
Miss Copley.
You can call me Jillian.
Okay, Jillian then. What do you do? I mean, for a living.
What do I do for a living?
Yes, I'm an accountant. Helen's a housewife. Tom here is a social worker. What do you do?
A secretary, currently unemployed.
I see.
No, you don't see.
Pardon?
What does this have to do with death, my being an unemployed secretary?
Our reaction to the death of someone in our lives has to do with our entire life, before the death occurred and afterward. Because everything about our life impacts how we handle a death.
Why are you unemployed, Jillian? Did it have something to do with the dog?
Well, of course it has something to do with the dog. One thing led to another, then the dog died, and I became depressed.
Well, that's not unusual.
It wasn't the first time I was depressed.
Oh?
I have a history.
Of being depressed?
Of a few things, actually, but yes, that's one of them.
Would you like to share what some of those other things are?
Is this beating around the bush really necessary? I mean, we're only going to be here for a couple hours.
I didn't really come here expecting to talk about my entire life.
This is just the first session, George. Remember, the group is ongoing.
I think what he means is that it would be easier to be helpful if we all just spoke our mind, the way George and I have, about how we're devastated. Well, not that we have a history of devastation or anything else like that. Nothing like this has ever happened to us before.
Are you suggesting that something like this has happened to Jillian before?
I have no idea. Has it?
Has anybody else died before? No, of course not. I'm only 28 years old. I mean, I guess that doesn't mean nothing's happened, but it hasn't.
Death isn't the only thing that can put a person over the edge.
What exactly do you mean by over the edge?
Over the edge? I mean, I think it means when a person can't get on with their life without getting help.
Like us, coming to this group.
Well, what do you think? Does your coming to this group mean that you're over the edge?
No, I've already been to a group for being over the edge.
Oh?
AA.
AA?
Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, you asked.
Was this after the dog died?
No, it was before the dog died.
I see.
No, you don't see. I've been going to AA for a long time.
Are you going to one of those groups now?
Yes.
You know, I think it might not be a good idea to be going to two groups at once.
Why not?
Well, it seems a little redundant. I mean, if you're drinking because your dog is dead, it seems to me you could be discussing the dead dog at AA.
And not here.
What does one thing have to do with the other?
Everything has to do with everything else. There's nothing wrong with going to several groups at the same time.
George, you said you and Helen have been to 5 different groups.
Yeah, but we went to them one at a time. We didn't go to them all at the same time.
So you're a serial groupist?
What?
All right, let's get back to death. Jillian, your father got you this dog.
Right, to keep me under control. I knew it. I knew it right from the beginning. But what could I do? Bring it back to the shelter and know it'd probably be put to sleep?
A guilt trip.
He got me a dog. He wanted me to be his damn dog.
What?
He wanted me to obey his orders, keep me on a leash so I couldn't have my own life. Sit up and beg for a few crumbs. Ruff! Ruff!
I really don't think this is a good idea.
Stop it!
I came here to talk about my son.
Okay, George, it's all right. Let's talk about your son. You said he died of a heart attack during a Little League baseball game.
Our son, my son, was only 39 years old. Had a heart attack while he was coaching a Little League baseball game. He was gone in a minute. Gone. If only I could feel that there was some meaning, some logic.
George, could you tell us something about your son?
What do you mean?
Was he married? Were there any grandchildren?
No marriage. No grandchildren. I mean, he was very involved with his career. He was a chemist.
He loved baseball. He was very active in the Little League. He loved those boys. Every weekend from early spring to the end of October, he was out at those games.
Was there any medical condition, any history of heart trouble?
No, not at all. Family on both sides lived into their 80s.
He wasn't a robust child, but he was healthy. Even as an adult, he was always fit.
He was a non-smoker, kept his weight down, worked out at a health club.
And that's why it was such a total shock.
We actually didn't know much about his life. I mean, he was a chemist, but we really never understood what he did. He tried to explain it to us a few times, but it was way over our heads.
He spoke more about Little League. We never could understand why he liked baseball so much. As a boy, he wasn't keen on sports, the way so many of them are.
I always thought it was a substitute for his own family because he didn't have children of his own. I mean, you know, there was always practice and then the games on weekend. It kept him busy.
We didn't see too much of him, and that was a sore point with us. He was our only child. Other only children we knew seemed much closer to their parents.
Could it be, George, that some of what you're feeling now is anger about your relationship with your son? Something that you were not allowed to express while he was still alive?
Angry? I'm angry that he's dead, but that's not his fault.
But you said that you didn't see, that he wasn't married, he didn't have any children, and that you didn't see much of him.
He did have a cat. It lives with us now.
Can we drop the animals, please?
George, can you tell me how you felt when you were told that your son was dead?
How I felt?
You said, we have to go quickly. You wanted to make sure.
Be quiet, Helen!
I will not be quiet.
That question was directed at me. I'm just trying to gather my thoughts.
Maybe you've blanked it out?
What do you mean?
Well, when people are traumatized, sometimes they choose subconsciously not to remember.
He said, we must go quickly. He told me to call a taxi.
But I don't trust doctors. I didn't want them doing anything that Tim would not have approved of.
But he was already dead.
When it happened so suddenly, you just...
We spoke to the Little League director. He was at the hospital.
He said Tim was coaching that afternoon. His team was ahead.
He said Tim was sitting in the dugout, the place where they wait their turn to bat.
One of his boys hit a grand slam home run. Tim jumped up from the dugout. He shouted, he cheered, and then he clutched his chest, and he fell to the ground.
George, what is the matter with you? Get up off the floor.
And then we got a call to go to the hospital. But he was already dead.
So we got to the hospital and the questions started.
Questions?
You know, his health, his medical history, whatever they call it.
We really didn't know anything. He was an adult. We didn't even know the name of his doctor.
They asked if we wanted an autopsy. At first we said no, but then we agreed.
I thought we should call Barney, but George said...
Helen, we agreed.
I know we agreed, but we have been to 5 groups, and I don't see why we...
Who is Barney?
Tim's friend.
They used to always...
Hang around together?
Yes. We'd met him only a few times, but they'd been friends for years. They
were good friends. They met during their last year in college. They went to Europe after graduation together.
So why didn't you want to contact him?
It isn't that I didn't want him to know. I meant to contact him, but at that moment...
Oh, it was just so confusing. It was so busy at the hospital, patients being rushed by on stretchers, hospital workers in those green coveralls running around, and announcements on the loudspeaker. It was enough to make your brain stop working.
That's it. That's it. I couldn't think straight. That's it. I couldn't take it in that he was dead. I mean, they told me he was dead, but I didn't believe it.
So you had the autopsy done?
Yeah, we did.
Okay. And?
They said he died of a heart attack, but they also said that the heart attack could have been caused by an allergic reaction because his heart was okay. In fact, everything was okay.
What kind of allergy?
We have no idea. He was out at the baseball field all the time, so it couldn't have been grass or plants.
They thought it was something he ingested, something he ate.
Well, did you pursue it?
Pursue it? We could hardly believe he was dead.
And how could we have pursued it?
We would have had to hire a private detective. They would have had to question everyone in the Little League. Oh, man, he was already dead, and it was just too overwhelming.
And probably impossible to prove anything. They said he could have eaten something and not even known he was allergic.
It was all so complicated. All ifs and maybes, and it was too late.
One of the things that we share here is that all the deaths we hear about were sudden. And when it happens suddenly, you're totally unprepared.
Not that there's a way to prepare, but I think in the case of an elderly person or someone who's been ill for a long time, you know in the back of your mind their time is coming.
You said your brother had cancer.
Yes, but he didn't have any symptoms until about 6 weeks before he died.
How is that possible?
Well, he had a pain in his back. He went to the doctor. The doctor told him it was sciatica. And finally, they put him in the hospital for more tests.
And he never left the hospital again, I bet.
Exactly.
You hear about that all the time.
Well, it shouldn't have been a big surprise. He smoked 2 packs a day. He never had a chest x-ray. The doctor told him the cancer was everywhere.
Even though it was sudden, it doesn't sound like you were really surprised. But you went to a bereavement group anyway? Why did you do that?
Well, as it happened, I was the last person to see him alive and conscious. So I was kind of spooked.
Spooked?
Right. I really disliked my brother. He was the family big shot, big brother, big attorney, big money. And I was the family little shot, social worker, non-profit salary. So it was just kind of weird that I was the last person to see him alive.
Maybe it was a kind of retribution, punishment for him, a reward for you, that he died and you lived.
Oh, you mean the big bad wolf had to have his enemy alive and well and sitting at his deathbed? I never thought of that.
I truly believe in spiritual repayment.
Yeah, well, it was a hell of a reward.
If you ask me, I think this spiritual ward stuff is a lot of bunk. I think it was just pure coincidence that you were at your brother's deathbed.
They say there's no such thing as a coincidence.
And if you ask me, I say that life is a crapshoot. Pardon my language.
So you think it was just chance your son dropped dead?
What else could it be? I mean, even if it was an allergic reaction, why not the overweight 50-year-old umpire who's standing out in the heat of the sun?
That's all the more reason to be suspicious about how he died.
That's a whole new avenue to follow, but that's up to George and Helen.
Then there's always the death wish theory.
Death wish theory.
Some people have a secret death wish because there's something about their lives they can't stand.
My son was a happy man. Anyway, people who have a death wish usually commit suicide.
Don't I know it?
Excuse me?
I was just thinking that when you're depressed, you think about killing yourself all the time.
Well, maybe you just should have.
Many more people than we realize contemplate it, especially if they lost a loved one.
Well, I certainly wouldn't kill myself over a dog. And I at least knew my dog.
Can we not go back to that dog business, please?
Actually, I'm finished talking about the dog.
Good.
But I'm not finished talking.
Oh, so what are you going to talk about?
My father.
Your father? What does he have to do with other than that he gave you the...
Well, the main reason I've been to all of these therapy groups is that my father always told me I was useless.
That's ridiculous. No one tells their child they're useless.
Oh, yes, they do.
What I mean is, it's ridiculous to tell a child that they're useless.
But people do it anyway. At least my father did. And according to him, I couldn't do anything right. And by the time I was in my teens, I was not only useless, but a slut too. That's when I started drinking, in high school.
Well, it's the old self-fulfilling prophecy. They tell you you're no good, so you start to be no good.
Exactly, and my drinking only made things worse. My parents found out. I don't know, I guess maybe I let him find out. It was all part of the game.
Did your mother try to defend you against your father's abuse?
Are you kidding me? She's too busy defending herself.
You mean he abused her too?
My father was a woman hater. He treated the family dog better than he treated us. Oh, pardon me for mentioning the dog, George.
But didn't anybody ever go to the authorities? I mean, when you were in school?
They had no grounds or evidence. It wasn't like I came in with cigarette burns all over me.
Have you ever tried psychotherapy?
Of course I tried psychotherapy. I told you it was my shrink who suggested I come here.
Jillian, have you been in psychotherapy for a long time?
Yes and no. I mean, I've been going to therapy for a long time. But not with the same therapist.
How many different therapists did you go to?
6.
6?
6. That's even more than the number of bereavement groups you two have been to, George.
Isn't that an unusually large number of therapists to see?
Isn't 5 bereavement groups an unusually large number of groups to go to?
Ha! Ha!
Well, the first one retired. The next one I left after about 6 months. You know, sometimes they just don't work out for you.
That is so true.
The next one kind of dropped dead. Now I was having a session, thank God. That happened while someone else was in there.
Jillian, are you making this up?
No. Why would I make this up?
It just sounds so...
No, I swear I'm not making this up. I just happen to be one of the most messed up people you could ever hope to meet.
Well, I think we figured that out for ourselves.
George, hush.
I also happen to know that you're a close second, George. Your level of denial is amazing.
What do you mean, my level of denial?
I know you're not fooling yourself, and don't think for a minute you're fooling the rest of us. Well, I shouldn't speak for anybody else, but you're not fooling me.
I don't know what you're talking about.
George, tell us a little something about your son. What was your relationship with him when he was young?
We spoiled him, I think.
You spoiled him, Helen. I did not spoil him. You always gave in. I wanted him to be a man, but you wanted...
You can't make somebody into something they're not.
We could have done more for him if you hadn't stood in the way.
What do you mean, done more for him?
I tried to get him involved in the things that boys do. I insisted he join the Boy Scouts, but he wasn't interested in doing those things that Boy Scouts do. Camping, jamboree, canoeing. I wanted him to do those things that the Boy Scouts do to change boys into men. I thought maybe I needed more help than I could do myself.
So he joined the Scouts.
He joined because I didn't give him a choice. I took him to those meetings, and I picked him up afterwards.
You know how he hated those meetings, George.
It was for his own good. And when they went on those trips, I bought him all the best equipment. Backpack, hiking boots. The kid had everything. And he still didn't want to go.
There was another reason he didn't want to go. You know that.
What other reason? I don't remember any other reason.
From what you said, he doesn't sound like the Boy Scout type.
What other reason?
It was the other boys in the troop.
What about them?
They picked on him.
They picked on him?
That was just an excuse, Helen. Believe me, no one picked on him.
But they did, George. He told me. They saw he was different. It was obvious that he wasn't there because he wanted to be. He couldn't even swim. And then they went on those canoe trips.
I tried to teach him how to swim, but he couldn't learn. He had to wear that damn life preserver.
You know, George, this isn't about you. And that's why they picked on him.
Yes, it was a big deal. You know how boys are. They're always looking for a...
Scapegoat?
No, a victim.
Exactly. They weren't really bad. It's just how boys are at that age.
And Tim was the perfect victim.
That's ridiculous. If you had listened to me, Helen, he would have learned how to be a man and defended himself.
And there he was, not wanting to be there. And with all that shiny new equipment that he didn't want and didn't know how to use, it couldn't have been more obvious that he was a square peg in a round hole.
That's precisely why I sent him there, Helen, to shape him up, to make him into what he's supposed to be.
You wanted to make him into what you wanted to be. Not all men are that macho.
Macho men are such bullshit. That's how my father was.
Your father was abusive. That's not what macho means. A macho man stands up for himself and others. There's more to it than sports and camping. That's just one part of it.
Plenty of men don't play sports, but they still stand up for themselves.
Who? Give me one example.
Me, for one.
You.
That's right. I never wanted to be a Boy Scout. I never learned canoeing or swimming or any of that stuff.
Then what did you do? When you were a kid?
I loved books and read them all the time. I joined things like the math club.
Math club?
Sports and camping aren't the only thing that boys do, George.
The Scouts did other things. It wasn't just about sports.
What other things?
They had all kinds of things. They had a band. They played music at parades.
Tim didn't play an instrument.
They gave him a drum.
I remember when they did that. He said he felt like a stupid little child beating on a toy drum.
Like in nursery school?
They did community service. They delivered meals to the elderly on Thanksgiving and Christmas.
But those weren't the kind of things you wanted him to do. You know that's not why you sent him.
I was just trying to help him. All I wanted was...
For him to fulfill your dreams?
All you wanted. That was the problem. You wanted to make him into...
Another version of George?
Another George.
But isn't that normal? Fathers want their sons to be like them. Mothers want their daughters to be like them. I don't see that I did anything so terrible. And if I had let you have your way, Helen, he wouldn't have even had that scouting experience under his belt.
If you'd let me have my way, Tim would have been a happier child. Who knows what he might have done with the time that he spent with the Boy Scouts? He might have done more with science. He might have won some kind of a prize.
Oh, he might have cloned Dracula.
Oh, stop it, George.
But don't the Scouts have all kinds of projects? Don't they have those badges for various kinds of
It
accomplishments?
didn't matter. He was destined to fail with that troop. The other boys made his life miserable because of who he was. So he stopped trying.
Well, it doesn't sound as if he turned out badly. You said he was a chemist. He had friends, a career, a life.
What George means is that...
Helen, we agreed.
Yes, we agreed, but we have been to 5 groups and I...
Your son was gay.
What?
A homosexual, a faggot, a queer.
How dare you?
Jillian, I don't think that language is necessary.
I'm just trying to get the whole picture.
Yes, He was a homosexual.
But that had nothing to do with his death. He died of a heart attack. He didn't die from that disease.
But maybe, George, his lifestyle has something to do with the way you're handling his death.
Or not handling it.
It's Helen who has the problem. It's because of Helen we've been to all these damn groups.
And I've been to all these groups because of you. Because I cannot deal with your total denial of who Timothy was. He made me promise that we would never talk about that part of Tim's life when we went to these groups. We've been living a lie, and that's why the groups never worked for us.
Well, sometimes we can't admit our true feelings about people we're supposed to be close to. And when they die, we have these unresolved conflicts.
I didn't hate my son. His lifestyle made some things difficult.
Like what?
All our friends talked about their children. There was always some kind of news. Weddings, marriages, grandchildren. What could we talk about? We had no other children.
Of course, we were proud of him. But George always felt
I
that...
can speak for myself, Helen. I felt cheated.
How so?
Cheated out of a lot of things that parents expect.
Like what?
My future. My genes being continued.
You know, a lot of parents feel that way. All we are to them is a means to continue their lives and their hopes, or to fulfill dreams they were never able to fulfill.
I do not think I wanted Tim to fulfill my dreams.
It's a hell of a burden to put on your kids.
I don't think I wanted Tim to fulfill my dreams. But a grandchild or grandchildren is not too much to wish for.
I think even though we tried to put a good face on it, he sensed that we weren't satisfied with him. And so he avoided us.
You mean he sensed your...
Disappointment. There, I've said it. I was disappointed. I thought I had a son. I did have a son, and I wanted what comes with having a son. Man-to-man talks, continuation of the family lineage. I thought he would come to me for advice, but no. He went his way with that Barney fella.
You can't blame Barney for anything.
I'm not blaming Barney.
Did you ever invite Barney with Tim to come over for the holidays or even for dinner?
We invited him for Thanksgiving, a year or two after Tim graduated from college. Tim had mentioned him a few times, so we decided to invite him.
And did he come?
No, not at first. Well, Barney was from Wisconsin, so he always went home for the holidays. At least that's what Tim always told us. But then, later on, he did come.
And?
It was obvious what their relationship was.
Until we actually met Barney, we thought...
You were able to fool yourselves.
Jillian, we're not here to criticize.
I didn't mean it as criticism, Tom. Sometimes I just know when people are fooling themselves.
How do you know?
Well, I've had a lot of experience fooling myself. It's a lot easier to be in denial. That way you don't have to deal with your problems.
So you think Helen and George just didn't want to see the obvious?
Of course they didn't want to see it. If they had wanted to see it, they would have seen it when Tim was a child. That's why they tried to make him do all those manly things. They knew, but they couldn't admit it.
So when you finally admitted to yourself that your son was gay, what did you do?
We tried to get Tim to see a psychotherapist when we first found out about his orientation.
Why? You thought he could change?
Well, maybe. Yes, if he just tried hard enough, maybe he could be normal.
Of course he was normal. He was happy, he had a good life, he shared his life with others. We just thought maybe if he went to see someone, he could... I don't know what we thought.
You thought maybe he could change and not be a homosexual anymore. Admit it, Helen. And maybe he could bring a cute little thing into the world for you to push around George.
Enough, Jillian. Did he go?
As with everything else we suggested, he said he would, but he never got around to it. At least he didn't criticize us for suggesting it.
I wonder if it would have done any good. They now say it's genetic.
Then there was the gay rights movement, so we gave up on trying to get him to change.
So what it sounds like, George, is that you had certain expectations of your son that weren't met. And now that he's dead, you know they never will be met. That sounds like the root of your problem.
We all have expectations, Tom. I mean, what did you want from life? I don't think all you expected was to be a social worker and leave bereavement groups. That doesn't strike me as much of a life. What did you really want?
Want? Well,
When you were a boy, what did you expect from life?
I do have a master's degree and I am licensed. I do not consider myself a failure.
I don't think you're a failure, Tom.
Sure you don't. You want to date him.
When I was a boy, well, I don't think I really had any ambitions, really. I mean, at least I don't remember any. There was always my brother. He always made a big splash, even as a teenager. And then there was I, the afterthought. Yes, Daniel was a hard act to follow.
What exactly did he do that was so monumental?
My brother always had to be the best at everything. He was already in college by the time I was conscious of what was really going on. But the evidence was all over the house. Trophies, awards, diplomas. He was interested in everything, sports, debating, you name it.
You figured, why bother, right? You couldn't possibly be as good. The pressure alone would kill you.
Exactly.
I know that feeling. I was the youngest also, and no matter what I did, it would never be enough. But I had it worse because I was the only girl, and the only thing I was supposed to succeed at was childbearing. 28 and still no kids. The ultimate failure.
Jillian, you should not look at yourself as an ultimate failure.
Oh, I don't anymore, but I did for a lot of years.
I don't think you're a failure at all. You have a good soul.
Thank you, Tom.
A good soul? What is she, some kind of minister or priest, too?
George.
No, all I mean is that Jillian cares about animals, about people.
So, Tom, you became a social worker. Why? Why that?
It was the complete opposite of everything my brother stood for. Daniel was selfish. He was materialistic. He didn't care who he had to walk on to be a success. But to be a good social worker, you have to have compassion, and you don't get rich.
So you planned your life to be the opposite of your brother, rather than what you wanted it to be.
Right, I felt that whatever I wanted to be didn't matter because I didn't measure up to my brother. I wasn't that kind of person. All I was good at was being unsuccessful. At least from his point of view.
But you're not unsuccessful.
It's not like you're a homeless drug addict. Like you said, you have a master's degree, and you're licensed.
True. Luckily, I wasn't that self-destructive. My objective was to be the opposite of my brother. Self-effacing, modest means. But to go to the other extreme would have been too much like him, calling attention to myself in another way.
So what about now?
What do you mean?
Your brother's dead. You could be whatever you want.
But the glow of his empire continues.
But not forever. Time will pass. People begin to forget.
Sometimes after people die, their lives are glamorized even more.
That's only for movie stars and saints. People with false fronts get found out once they're not around to keep up the charade.
So what's your next career move, Tom?
Well, actually, I've always wanted to be an actor.
Oh, really?
Really?
No, not a movie star type, no. Just the kind of an actor who plays the character parts, like a butler, sidekick.
You mean the person in the background, who makes the moves, who gets things going?
Right.
Well, now that the competition's gone, what's to stop you?
It's not that simple, George. True, my brother is gone, but I still have to deal with what's in my mind. I can't just wake up one morning and think, oh, well, I'm going to put my resentments aside and get on with it. No, I'm still the younger brother who was expected to measure up and didn't.
I see, but being an actor is the same thing that you're doing now. You're in front of an audience, you're putting on a show. It's a poor substitute for what you might really accomplish.
Group therapy is serious business. It's not some entertainment.
Anything less than an Emmy doesn't make it.
Really? And George, it's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow morning and say, gee, my son's dead. I don't have to deal with that gay business anymore.
We will never stop dealing with that.
You know, it seems to me that somebody with your background, somebody in the psychology business, you would have figured out some way by now to get over this obsession with your brother.
Sometimes you don't get past things, George. Sometimes you don't want to, because there's something you have to resolve, and until you do that, you can't let go.
I joined the Little League.
Were you good at baseball, Tom?
Well, I wasn't exactly major league material, let's put it that way. I mean, I thought I was reasonably good. I was as good as anyone else on the team, but that wasn't good enough.
Did something happen?
Of course something happened. I was playing at a big game. It was the end of the season. My division had playoffs. Everyone came. Parents, brothers, my parents were there, and my brother showed up. He gave me a big pep talk before the game. How I had to go out there and wallop the other team. We were in the last inning of the game. Score was tied. If the other team didn't get ahead, we'd go to extra innings, and then we'd maybe have a chance to win.
The pressure must have been terrible.
And not just the pressure of the game, no. I knew my brother was out there. I wanted to show him I was good. I was in the outfield. The other team was up. The batter comes up, he hits a line drive. I ran for it. I was watching the ball. I knew I would catch it. And then I ran and I tripped and fell.
How awful. That sucks.
And the other team won.
The other team won. The bases were loaded and they scored 3 runs.
Oh, no.
I guess you weren't Mr. Popularity after the game.
To put it mildly, my whole team was down in the mouth. Our coach made one of those speeches about how things happen and it's how you play the game. Yeah, the usual stuff they tell you, but that wasn't the worst of it.
What could be worse?
That night at supper, my brother wouldn't stop talking about what a total jerk I was. I still remember what we ate. Meatloaf. Because my mother finally said, "Daniel, stop it and eat your meatloaf." He was gloating. I almost felt like he was actually happy that I screwed up, and that was just the beginning.
The beginning?
Well, after I failed at baseball, I got on my school debating team. My brother said he would coach me, so I felt this was a chance for me to do things right this time.
No offense, Tom, but I can't see you debating.
You're right, George. They'd give us a subject, like some ridiculous thing like, was the American Revolution a success? My brother would help me prepare. He would teach me how to read up on a subject and make a list of points. Then we'd come up with a phonetic system with keywords, so I'd remember them, like a bunch of keywords, like Brit, tea, taxes, that kind of a thing.
I don't know how you could go wrong with that kind of system.
I never had a problem making my points. I remembered everything that I wanted to say. But when I got out there in the debate, I just felt it wasn't fair to just shut my opponent up without letting them make all their points. And sometimes I felt like their points were better than mine. I wanted to listen to what other people had to say, so of course it was a disaster.
That's why you became a therapist. You're a natural listener.
After that incident, he just wouldn't let up. Everything I did, he criticized.
So what did you do to cope?
I ate.
You ate.
I know you're not going to believe this, but pretty soon I looked like Humpty Dumpty.
No.
Yes, I ate donuts.
Donuts? What a thing for a kid to eat. I thought donuts was an adult junk food.
No, George, it was a kid comfort food back then. I used to go to the bakery and spend my allowance on donuts. They were relatively cheap. I especially liked the kind with the dusted powdered sugar.
I love chocolate donuts.
But didn't your parents stop you?
I gained the weight gradually. So by the time they noticed when I didn't fit into my clothes, it was too late. And you know what? I didn't care.
But you look fine now.
Well, I lost the weight my senior year of college. By that time, I had some direction and I got out from underneath my brother's abuse. But even now, I have to watch what I eat. The damage was already done.
But you brought donuts tonight.
That's right. Well, every now and then I allow myself a couple.
Well, I guess I knew I'd be talking about my brother tonight, so I thought I'd indulge. Just in case, when I remembered thinking about him, how I couldn't do anything right.
Loose ends.
You could call it that.
I'll never find out who poisoned my dog, or why.
That may be true, but there must be other ways that you could...
Make it up somehow? I do feel guilty about leaving him out on the street. I did it 1,000,000 times, and I know lots of people do it, but in a way, I feel like it was my own fault.
Then maybe you can think of something to do to make up for it.
Like volunteer at an animal hospital, or maybe I could be a sort of inspirational speaker at kennel clubs. Listen, brothers and sisters, to my story and don't leave your dogs unattended.
I think the point is you want to feel that the death was not for nothing, that something good can come out of it, that some good has to come out of it, if you're ever going to let it go.
I don't see myself doing any kind of gay business. Well, since Tim's death had nothing to do with him being that way.
Hey, George, you could volunteer for the Little League. That would be a great way to honor your son.
Volunteer for the Little League? What on earth would I do for the Little League? I don't know anything about playing baseball, and I'm too old to run the bases.
You could do fundraising. You said you're an accountant. You must know something about money.
Fundraising?
That's a wonderful idea. Maybe we could Buy some new benches or bleachers for the Little League field where Tim coached. Get a plaque with his name on it. You know, like seats donated in a concert hall.
Right, in loving memory of your son.
That kind of thing costs big money. What kind of fundraising could you do?
Well, there must be something that I could do. They have bake sales. I could make cookies.
Cookies? When did you ever bake cookies?
I can certainly follow a recipe. Baking cookies is not brain surgery.
Helen, how did you put up with him all these years?
Marriage is a two-way street. He also put up with me.
The point is we have to take some action. We have to take some action that'll make us feel...
That will make us feel less helpless, that something positive can come out of what we lost.
Exactly. That's very good, Jillian.
Well, I didn't go to all those shrinks and groups for nothing.
A plaque? So what are you going to do, Tom?
What do you mean?
What action are you going to take? About your brother?
I'm going to do volunteer work for the American Cancer Society.
You are? What kind of volunteer work?
I'm going to lecture school groups on the dangers of smoking.
Oh, that sounds right up your alley, Tom.
Oh, don't be so negative. We came here to get help.
You know, I've been thinking, I've just had an idea of something you could do.
Hope it doesn't have anything to do with dogs.
Right. I don't happen to be one. Anyway, I know this is going to sound kind of far out, but just hear me out for a second.
So, what is it?
Do you know if your son was allergic to peanuts?
What on earth do peanuts have to do with anything?
We really didn't know anything about his medical situation. What's the difference?
Well, peanuts are a common allergen. Lots of people are allergic to them. Some people even die from eating them.
How can you die from peanuts?
There was an item in the news just a few weeks ago. A woman in a restaurant ate something that had peanuts in it. And she didn't even know it had peanuts in it, and she stopped breathing. They called the paramedics, but it was too late.
What are you getting at?
Maybe someone at the Little League tricked your son into eating peanuts to cause him to have an allergic reaction. They might not want him to kill him, just to make him sick.
But why would anybody do that? They all loved him. The director told us they all loved him.
Oh, I can think of a few reasons why. Maybe someone wanted to disrupt the game. His team was ahead. Maybe the opposition was trying to get the game called off. I would imagine if someone got seriously ill or died in the middle of the game, they wouldn't go on playing.
Isn't that rather extreme?
To some people, this stuff is their whole life. You yourself said your son's life practically revolved around the Little League.
That's ridiculous. Anyway, if it was the opposing team, how would they find out that he was allergic to peanuts? And why peanuts?
It's one of the things people eat at baseball games. They don't spoil and you just pop them in your mouth, like in the song. Take me out to the ball game, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks.
I still don't...
Maybe someone knew he was allergic to peanuts. Maybe he mentioned it?
But if he knew he was allergic to peanuts, why would he eat them?
The person who gave them to him could have disguised him.
How can you disguise peanuts? Give them a beard? Even if you coated them with chocolate, they'd still taste like peanuts.
Someone could have ground them up and put them in something.
Like what?
Like, cookies.
Cookies?
You could grind them up very fine, use a lot of spices to cover the taste.
Tim didn't eat cookies.
How do you know?
Tim didn't eat sweets, remember?
But if someone came with homemade cookies and pushed them on him, he might have eaten one to be polite.
That's the stupidest thing I ever heard.
It's just a theory, George, but it sounds like something you might want to think about.
What's the use about thinking of peanuts and cookies? Or maybe you want to put some peanuts in the cookies you're going to bake for the Little League.
This might be a clue to why Tim died.
You said you came to this group to get answers, George.
And then there's another thing, George. Another possibility of why someone would want to harm your son.
Why would anyone want to harm my son?
They might not have wanted someone who was homosexual spending time with their children.
What?
It's just a theory. There are plenty of people who might not like the idea of a gay man being with their boys.
What do you mean?
Well, if your son was a homosexual and there were all these young boys around, someone might think, you always hear about in the news, about cases of molestation, like in the Boy Scouts.
How dare you? My son would never...
I didn't say he did. I said people might think or be worried that he might.
You mean someone might have been prejudiced against his orientation for whatever reason?
Exactly. People don't even need a reason.
Sit down, George.
So you think our son was poisoned?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a definite possibility.
Poisoned?
We're talking about murder.
Murder?
Poisoning is murder. My dog was murdered.
I didn't come to a bereavement group to find out that my son was murdered.
We didn't say he was murdered, George. It was just a theory.
Right, it's just a theory. But it's a theory I can't ignore. Now I'm going to have to do something about it.
You can't ignore murder, George.
That's what I just said, Helen.
It's just an idea. I mean, you don't have to jump up and run out of the room and go straight to the police station.
Young lady, don't you dare tell me what I have and don't have to do.
But George, maybe we should go right to the police station. Tim has already been dead a year. We can't waste any time.
This is unbelievable. What do you think, Tom?
What do I think? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's certainly something to look into.
I can't imagine how we'd even start. A year has gone by.
I think you'd need a lawyer to begin with.
It would be terribly complicated. They'd have to exhume the body,
And they'd have to track down everyone who was at that baseball game.
question them, interrogate them.
And we'd have to get Barney involved. He knew Tim better than anyone else.
We don't even know where Barney is. We'd have to hire a private investigator.
Well, it was just an idea. I mean, we were talking about death having some kind of meaning. You wouldn't want to think your son died because of someone's ignorance. I mean, I certainly wouldn't.
It's certainly something to think about.
We could start by talking to a lawyer, get an opinion.
We could talk to the director of the Little League. He really liked him.
The director of the Little League is only going to want to avoid problems. In fact, everybody is going to try to avoid trouble.
Except us.
It would be a major undertaking.
But imagine if Jillian's theory turned out to be true.
There could be a major lawsuit, not to mention a criminal trial, a wrongful death, or whatever they call that.
And if there was a cash settlement, we could donate it to a gay cause in Tim's memory.
Regardless of how it went, at the end, you would at least know you did everything you could to know what really happened.
And it would be a way of keeping Tim alive in our minds. Not that he isn't always in our minds, but...
The years go by, and it's human nature to start to forget. Not entirely, but life goes on. It has to. And at the end, you'd at least have closure.
I think I'm finally starting to understand closure.
But wait a minute. What if we go through this entire process, dig up the body, have his stomach analyzed, assuming there was anything left to analyze, have everybody investigated, only to find out that he wasn't even poisoned, that he just ate something accidentally, or worse, there wasn't even any evidence left to analyze, and we couldn't prove anything.
At least we'd have tried.
You'd be willing to put all that time, effort, and money into such a long shot?
When Sparky died, I filed a police report. I asked for an autopsy, and that was for a dog. I had to do everything I could.
Right. You did everything you could. And did it give you any closure? No. You're here in this group.
Are you suggesting we not even bother looking into Tim's death?
No, I'm not saying we shouldn't bother. I'm saying it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack.
I know what it is. I know what it really is. It's this gay business that you never could deal with.
What do you mean?
You don't want to stir up anything having to do with Tim's sexuality. You want to keep him in the closet.
Why would I want to keep him in the closet?
Because you're embarrassed by who he was. You're disgusted by who he was. And you don't want to look like you support who he was and anyone else like him.
Don't be ridiculous, Helen.
It's you who's being ridiculous. Fine. If you don't want to pursue it, I will. I'll find Barney and he
You'll
and
do no such thing.
I most certainly will.
Helen, George, let's get ourselves under control. This is supposed to be a bereavement group. You can continue your personal arguments when you get home.
This is not a personal argument. This has to do with exactly why we came here, why we left those other groups.
What does this have to do with the other groups? This is the first time.
These groups are all about the wrong thing.
What do you mean about the wrong thing?
They've all got some stupid angle.
Angle?
You heard me, Tom. Why do people go to bereavement groups?
Why? Because they want help.
Right. Help. help, not some form of nonsense.
Nonsense? I don't know what you mean.
Remember that first group we went to? They wanted us to keep a diary, write down every day what we thought of our son, that kind of thing.
I thought that was a good idea.
Good idea. That was one of the stupidest things I ever heard of. And why do people go to a bereavement group? Not to write everything down. How are you going to get it under control if you keep harping on it? And if you're going to write everything down, why go to a group?
Well, keeping a diary is just one of the techniques groups sometimes use. Some group leaders like it.
I'm not writing a damn thing. If I wanted to be a writer, I would have taken a writing class.
You know, George, I actually agree with you. I wouldn't want to sit around thinking about what to write about my dog. I'd have to write about picking up dog poop.
It was just a way
Just a way. Some of the other groups had other stupid ways. Write down your dreams. That was another good one.
What does all that have to do with this group?
We've gotten totally away from why we came here.
We're here to deal with loss.
Loss, yes. Not to go on some stupid wild goose chase.
Looking into our son's death is not some wild goose chase. I think it's very constructive.
Constructive? It's not constructive. It's destructive. Instead of helping us to settle down, it's stirring things up all over again. It was enough to deal with all that once. The Little League, the doctors. Why would we want to do it all again?
But George, the group will be here to help you. This isn't a one-session group. We're scheduled for 10 weeks. And who knows? If we feel we need more time, we can continue in the next semester.
Oh, right. We can go on and on. Wait a minute. Now I get it. That must be part of the plan.
What plan?
They come up with all this stuff, diaries, investigations. It's all to keep us here.
Why would they need to keep us coming? We wanted to come.
George, I think what you're discussing is totally off the subject. We're here to discuss death and loss. You're certainly entitled to your opinion about how bereavement groups are run, but right now we're going to get back on track.
This is all your fault.
I was only trying to help George.
You were only trying to help? Is that what you did in all your other groups? Get into everybody's business?
Well, you didn't get anywhere in any of your other groups, did you?
Could we all just sit down? Could we all just simmer down? Coffee, anyone? Well,
George, Helen, Jillian.
I think we should get back to our agenda here. We've introduced ourselves, we've discussed why we're here, and we've described the deaths that brought us here. We've also uncovered a common thread amongst the deaths. Now, other than the fact that they were all sudden, can anyone think of what that thread might be? Each of the deaths we hear about involve poisoning in some way, whether actually or theoretically. Jillian's dog was poisoned. George and Helen's son might have been poisoned by peanuts, whether by accident or design. And my brother was poisoned by the cigarette industry, in my opinion.
I'm sorry we haven't spent more time talking about your brother. We seem to have got caught up in our own situations.
No need to apologize, Helen. My first obligation is to the group.
We could talk about him now, if you want. There's still time.
That's right, Tom. You shouldn't be cheated out of your fair share just because the rest of us have been hogging the stage.
Certain people have been hogging the stage.
Well, I don't know that there's really much more to say.
There's always more to say, as we found out. There must be something you can think of that you want to talk about?
Why don't you just come out and ask him for a date?
You said before that you were traumatized because you were the last person in your family to speak to your brother before he lost consciousness.
That's right.
There must be some reason for that. What exactly was going on between you two? Besides what you told us about your always being in competition with each other.
Actually, there is a reason. Something happened between us a long time ago. I didn't really forget about it, but sort of tucked it away in the back of my mind.
And it popped out?
That's right, it popped out. I was sitting in a plastic hospital chair, and all of a sudden I remembered something my brother said to me years ago. I was about 10 or 11 years old. I was reading a book of fables Probably for school. I was reading the story of the tortoise and the hare.
My brother came and looked over my shoulder to see what I was doing.
And he said, "Why are you reading that trash?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "The ones who plod along, meaning me, I suppose, never get anywhere. But the ones who run ahead are the winners." When I was sitting in that chair next to his bed, I remember that incident. And I thought, well, the hare is in the hospital and the tortoise is the one sitting in the visitor's chair.
Just like in the fable.
Just like in the fable.
And then he died.
Right. And then he died.
Do you think there's some kind of a lesson in that, Tom?
Let's not get started with the metaphysical stuff again. Besides, the session's almost over.
Are you going to be part of those mass lawsuits, Tom? Against the tobacco industry?
I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, there's a lot of money at stake. Not just for myself, but for my parents, too. On the other hand, I think to a great degree people are responsible for themselves, and I wouldn't want to capitalize on the death of someone I didn't approve of.
That's an excellent point, Tom. You've said what I couldn't say myself. The idea of a lawsuit. I'd be getting involved in things I'd rather leave alone. And the idea of murder, that's a long shot.
Oh, that's a matter of opinion.
Well, in my opinion, then.
Regardless of our opinions, another factor has to be considered in a bereavement group. So in the time that's left, I'll just touch on it. And that is that somehow we feel that we've been victimized.
Victimized?
That's right.
How are we victims? I thought the dead were the victims.
That's what most people think. But those that are left behind after the deaths are also victims too.
How are we victims?
I think that's pretty obvious.
Yours is an extreme case, what, with your father and all. George and I haven't had the misfortune of your experiences.
We are victims. Jillian is the victim not only of her father's abuse, which ultimately caused her to have the dog in the first place, not to mention the victim of whoever poisoned the dog.
And how are you a victim, Tom?
Well, I'm a victim of my brother's and parents' emotional abuse. They set me up for failure.
And what about us, Tom? Myself and George, how are we victims?
I would say you're a victim of society. Of a society that disapproved of your son's behavior and consequently made you feel inferior somehow. And even though your son's dead, that's always going to be hanging over you.
You know, you're right. After Tim died, the people in my office took up a collection. They wanted to make a contribution to an organization in his memory. It was a very thoughtful thing to do. My boss asked me to pick the charity. And when I told him to send the money to the Little League, he was visibly relieved. He said, "George, that's a wonderful idea. Everyone will find that acceptable." Acceptable? They were afraid I was going to pick one of those gay crisis groups.
We came to this bereavement group to talk about the dead. The dead are usually considered to be the victims. You know, the victims of murder, the victims of a heart attack, the victims of whatever it was that took their lives. But now I'm beginning to see that those of us who survived are victims too.
That's why we're in a bereavement group. Because we ourselves feel that something has been done to us.
Done to us by death.
I knew I was a victim before I came here.
I thought I was mourning for my son. Now I see I'm mourning for myself too.
We are all victims.
I mean, are we just going to sit here and feel sorry for ourselves?
What can we do? We can't just go up to the people we think are responsible and shoot them.
We can't even prove who's responsible.
No, we can't shoot them. But what we can do is empower ourselves.
Empower ourselves?
We have to convince ourselves that we cannot and will not allow ourselves to be victimized.
But you said it's not so easy to just get
And it's
past-
not easy, but we have to start somewhere. And the first thing we can do is thank the dead for dying.
What? That's crazy. Why would we thank the dead for dying?
If the dead were still alive, it would be much more difficult, maybe even impossible to face our feelings. We'd had too much guilt, fear, all those wonderful things that prevent us from getting on with our lives. But now that the dead are dead, we can free ourselves in a way we never could before.
Are you saying we should be glad they're dead?
No, not glad. But look at it this way. It's not as if we've caused these deaths. It's not our fault. But the dead are dead and we're still here. And as long as we're still here, why not?
Take advantage?
Not exactly take advantage. Make the most of the opportunity. Free ourselves.
Free ourselves of other people's prejudices?
From other people making us into what they want.
That's it.
How?
First, we have to admit to ourselves that we're victims. That's the hardest part.
I've known for years that I'm a victim.
I've never even spoken about it until now. I've never even allowed myself to verbalize it. That I'm a victim of Tim's lifestyle?
Helen?
It's certainly not a pleasant thing. Nobody wants to think of themselves as a victim.
Some people enjoy being a victim. It gives them an excuse.
An excuse for what?
For not getting on with their lives. For not doing things they know they have to but don't want to.
We're certainly not in that category, are we? George and I?
Oh, I don't know about that.
What do you mean?
You could have been more supportive of your son. Maybe you should have been.
But what could we have done?
Maybe you could have made Tim and Barney more a part of your lives.
How? Tim did not want to have anything to
That's
do
because
with
you didn't want to. You were the one who shut him out. You said you didn't have anything to talk about when your friends talked about their kids and grandchildren. But you could have talked about the kids your son was helping out by coaching Little League. There were reasons to be proud of Tim, but you never found out about him because you wanted to keep him in this closet.
What do you mean? We invited Tim all the time, but he...
Right, you invited him over all the time, but he never came. Maybe that's because he knew you really didn't want him to bring Barney along with him, even if you never said so. And Barney was his most important person.
It's true we told Tim that it wouldn't be right for him to bring Barney to family affairs, but that's no reason for him not to come himself.
If your parents told you not to bring Helen when you went to visit them, would you have gone to their house? Or would you have been insulted and not gone?
That's different. Helen is my wife. That would have been ridiculous.
Well, maybe Tim felt about Barney the way you feel about Helen.
How long have Tim and Barney been together?
Since college.
Well, that's a long time to be together. I mean, most straight couples don't last that long.
What difference does it make to talk about that now? Tim is dead.
You could have done just what you thought of to do now that he's dead. You could have baked those cookies to raise money for the Little League. In fact, you could have baked those cookies to raise money for some gay crisis organization.
How does any of this have anything to do with us being victims?
Don't you see? Prejudice against homosexuals made you into a victim.
The fact that we're here in this group is an indication that we're victims.
It's not as if we're feeling sorry for ourselves. That's not what I mean.
What you mean, George, is that we don't want to be victims. We don't even want to admit that we're victims.
Yes, that's it.
But if you don't admit you have a problem, you can't begin to do something about solving the problem.
Admission is the first step.
Right.
But how do we go about admitting it? It seems to me that just to say I am a victim isn't enough.
That's right. You have to say it until you mean it.
Oh, and how do you do that? Just repeat it over and over?
You can't just say it. You have to admit it, as Jillian said.
How are we going to do this? Go around the room taking turns?
We can admit it together. We are all victims. That's right. Repeat after me. We are victims.
We are victims.
We can do better than that. Again, we are victims.
We are victims.
Again!
We are victims.
And what are we going to do about it?
That's the thing, Tom. I don't see how we can do anything about it. It's all too complicated.
With you, Tom, it's really just your brother and your parents. And for Jillian, it's her father. But for us, it's so many people. It's society.
But basically, Helen, we are victims of ourselves.
Ourselves?
We have allowed ourselves to fall under the pressure of other people.
You mean another girl might have run away from home instead of sticking around and taking it like I did?
Well, at least moved out, not really run away. I mean, running away doesn't solve anything.
You mean another girl might have killed her father and gone to jail?
Right, well, although that wouldn't be an ideal solution either.
Well, how the hell do we liberate ourselves from ourselves?
We don't have time for psychoanalysis, George and I. We're too old, and it takes too long.
That's not what I have in mind.
Then what did you have in mind?
What I have in mind is self-empowerment. It's a technique where we train ourselves not to automatically fall into the trap of, number one, letting other people tell us how to behave, and number two, not being afraid to stick up for ourselves.
Aren't they the same thing?
Essentially, yes, but I've broken it down to make it easier to recognize the behavior.
I think you've lost me, Tom.
Okay, I'll make it simple. The first thing we have to learn to do is to speak our minds.
You mean like telling people off?
That's one way of putting it.
You know, I'm always ready to tell people off, in my head, but when the time comes, the words just, they don't come out of my mouth.
You don't seem to have a problem speaking your mind here.
I always think afterwards of what I should have said when it's too late.
That's because you're afraid to speak the truth. But if you weren't afraid to speak the truth, if you were honest, then you could say what you needed to say.
There are usually consequences to speaking the truth.
True, there are consequences to speaking the truth. Some are negative, some are positive.
So we have to be willing to take the consequences.
It's important to remember there are consequences to not telling the truth also. But first, we need to speak our minds to ourselves.
You mean for practice?
In a way. You can't admit the truth to another person until you admit it to yourself.
I'm not sure I understand this, Tom.
I'll give you an example. I don't have to live my life according to anyone else's rules.
I think I get it. I decide who I am and what I am. Nobody else does, including my father.
Good. George? Helen?
No one can tell me anything about my son. No one can tell me who my son is or what my son is. Was.
Okay. George?
No one can say anything negative to me about my son.
Good, George.
The thing I don't understand, Tom, is how this is going to help us confront our...
Enemies?
Are they really our enemies? I mean...
Of course there are enemies. You think my father, who called me useless and a slut, is my friend?
We're really our own enemies if we don't stand up and defend ourselves against the world.
So we've identified the enemy, and it's us. Now, I know that sounds trite, but maybe it's true. Then what do?
We change our way of thinking.
How?
Through a kind of self-mind control.
Self-mind control?
Self-brainwashing.
Self-brainwashing?
We're going to brainwash ourselves, but you have to buy into it. You have to want it. If you don't, then it won't work.
You mean we have to believe that this is the right thing for us to do? To speak the truth?
Right. Do you want to speak the truth, George?
This is why we're here, George.
Right. Right. Okay. Let's get on with it.
So let's try this again. We are victims.
We are victims.
We are victims.
We are victims!
To the dead!
To the dead!
To Tim!
To Tim! To Sparky!
To Sparky!
To Daniel!
To Daniel! The truth will set us free.
We
are victims. The truth will set us free. We are victims. The truth will set us free. We are victims.
I want to make a speech.
Hear, hear.
This is about my dog. I want to thank Sparky, not for being killed, but for opening my eyes to the truth. I want to thank him for allowing me to see what I have allowed to be done to me. And I vow that from this day on, I won't let anyone, not even you, Tom, tell me who I am or what I can and can't do. Thank you.
Yay!
And I want to make a speech. I want to let my brother know, and maybe he's out there somewhere listening, that it's because of him that I'm liberating myself from other people's expectations, including our parents' expectations. And I'm not beholden to my parents just because they gave me birth. Thank you.
I would like to thank my son for making me realize that I don't have to take any crap from anybody about his lifestyle ever again. And if anybody wants to give me any crap, I will just tell them to shove it.
Yay!
Is something wrong? Are you dizzy? He has blood pressure problems.
No, I'm not dizzy. I just...
What is it?
I just want to thank my son, Tim. We're supposed to speak the truth, right, Tom?
Right.
Whatever it is.
The truth will set you free.
Well, the truth is, I don't want to thank my son for anything. That's right. The truth is, I don't want to thank my son, Tim, for anything. He made my life miserable.
But it's you who allowed him.
Shut up, Helen. We're supposed to speak the truth whether you like it or not. And this is my truth. That's right. My son made my life miserable. First of all, because he refused to have any relationship with me despite my overtures. Oh, I tried to accept him the way he was, but he wouldn't accept me. He never wanted to discuss anything with me. He said I wouldn't understand. He never gave me a chance to understand. So maybe it's just as well that he's dead, because he was never much of a son anyway.
How can you say such a thing?
I can say anything I want. We're supposed to speak the truth, so I'm speaking the truth. Now let's get out of here.
Wait a minute, George. This isn't the end of the group. Now that you've expressed your true feelings, you can move on to other things.
The only place I'm going to is out the door. I never wanted to come to these groups in the first place. It was Helen who dragged me to them. Get your purse and let's go.
I'm not going anywhere, George.
You want to stay here dancing around the room with these fools? You're fooling yourselves, all of you. Tom, I don't know what they teach you in social work school, but I'm sure dancing wasn't in the curriculum. And as far as expressing my true feelings are concerned, I think the bunch of you are lying to yourselves and each other. And Tom, how dare you tell Jillian that what her father did to her was her own fault?
George, I never said that what...
I know whose fault it was, George. How stupid do you think I am?
I have only one more thing to say to you, young lady. Arf! Arf!
George!
Helen, get your purse and let's go.
I told you I'm not going anywhere. The truth is, for the last 20 years, my marriage has been hell. For the last 20 years, my life has been hell. But I am not blaming my son.
Helen, you can keep coming to the group. There's so much more work you can do for yourself.
What's the point? George doesn't want to change anything.
It just seems that way right now, but he'll go home, he'll think about it, and he'll realize he's got to come back.
I think it was just too frightening for him.
Frightening?
He hates his own child. That is a terrible thing to admit.
But he admitted it. We all heard him. And that's the first step. Admission.
You don't know George.
Just come back next week, Helen, to the next session.
The next session?
Remember, Helen, this is an ongoing group. Next week we'll get some new people and get some fresh perspectives.
But George...
Let George decide for himself, but don't let him stop you from coming. Just come back next week, Helen, to the next session.
That's right. Maybe next time he'll have you dancing the cha-cha-cha. Come on, Helen. Get your purse and let's go.
You know, Tom, you're right. If there's going to be a next session, I will come, even if George won't. After all, this has been our biggest breakthrough ever. And maybe George will come one day. Who knows? Thanks for everything.
Goodbye, Helen, and good luck.
Goodbye, Jillian, and good luck.
Boy, that was a major breakthrough for George.
I think that was a major breakthrough for Helen. I mean, to do something that George wouldn't have let her do, not to keep her mouth shut, speak her mind, come to a session alone.
So I haven't been a total failure.
Failure?
With this group.
You haven't been a failure at all, Tom. You've helped each of us, each in our own way.
Well, thanks. I didn't think... Well, how did I help you, Jillian?
Well, I've decided I'm never going to see my father ever again.
Really?
Well, what I really decided is I'm not going to put up with his bullshit. I mean, I'm just not going to get depressed over it, go on a bender after one of his visits. I'm not going to let him put me down ever again.
That's great.
And I'm going to get another dog. I'll name it Sparky too.
I thought having a dog was a big inconvenience.
It was, but this time I'll get a little lap dog. Less food to cart up the stairs. And if it's small enough, I can take it with me sometimes. And it'll remind me of my liberation. By the way, Tom, do you like dogs?
Dogs? Well, I never exactly considered myself a dog lover, but actually I don't mind them.
Great, then maybe we can walk Sparky 2 together. Don't worry, I'll do the pooper scooping.
I'll carry the dog food up to your third floor walk-up.
Deal. Pooper scooper date then. All set?
Sure, it would be one of a kind.
One of a kind, just like me. So maybe you'll call me then sometimes.
Bye.
To the victims!
There's such thing as plastic glass. There's such thing as second best. Open secrets, and I'm fooled. The friendly fire was clearly confused. There's such thing as happy sad. Some mean good when they say bad. All the tight slacks, soulless shoes. There ain't always exceptions to